Hello everyone, welcome to Organizing for America's special live webcast with the Honorable Arne Duncan. As folks know, in the past week, this country has seen incredible historic student loan reform as part of the reconciliation package that President Obama signed into law last week. Today with us in the studio, we are so pleased to have a very special guest. Arne Duncan was born and raised in Hyde Park in Illinois. He was the CEO of Chicago Public Schools and is currently the U.S. Secretary of Education. Folks may or may not know a tiny tidbit about his past life. He was actually also a pro basketball player in Melbourne, Australia. He has been quoted as saying, "The best thing we can do is educate our way to a better economy." Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Arne Duncan.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. And this legislation is absolutely historic. At a time when going to college has never been more important, it's never been more expensive, and unfortunately our nation's families haven't been under this kind of financial duress in a long, long time. With the passage of this legislation, dramatic increases in Pell Grants, about $36 billion over the next decade to make college more affordable, historic increases in money for community colleges, and we think community colleges have been this unrecognized gem along the education continuum. Money for HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions. We need those institutions not just to survive, but to thrive. And then finally, starting in 2014, something called income-based repayment that I'm very, very excited about. Historically, there are many folks who got to go to college, but had to take out massive loans and had really struggled to pay them back. With income-based repayment, IBR, those loan repayments will be capped at 10% of your income. And then if you go into the public service, teaching or the military, work for a non-for-profit or a governmental agency, after 10 years, all of those loans will be forgiven, erased. And so it's a huge opportunity for people to follow their passion, follow their heart. Historically, folks may have wanted to become a teacher but had $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 in loan and couldn't afford to do that. We're really trying to remove those barriers and get that next generation of great talent to serve the public. So this is a phenomenal opportunity for the country. It's the right legislation at the right time, and we can be more pleased and proud that it actually passed.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duncan. We're going to take a question from one of our students who are here with us today, Demetria.
Hello, my name is Demetria Gallagher, and I'm a student at the University of Illinois in Chicago. One of the biggest factors when a lot of students think about what school they should go to is tuition. What is your position on fixing college tuition rates to actually make college more affordable for college students?
College affordability is a huge challenge these days, and it's interesting. You see some universities where college costs are going up much faster than the rate of inflation, and that's a real challenge. You see other universities doing some innovative things, going to 3-year programs, going to no-frills universities, making it much more affordable. And we're lucky in this country. We have the best set of universities in the world, by far. No one comes close. And students have never had more choices. And so I think what we're going to see is you're going to see students voting with their feet. And if places are too expensive, if they're not getting value for money, they're going to go some other places. And places that are doing a good job of containing costs but also offering great education, you're going to see more students go there. And so it's something we're going to watch very, very closely. But the fact that there's so many great options out there, the fact that you have a couple thousand different opportunities around the country, students are going to make the right decision for them and for their family.
Great, thank you. There's been a lot of excitement about the fact that you were going to be here with us today, and a number of questions were submitted online. I'd like to take one of those right now. Rick from Venice, Florida says, is there going to be any relief for teachers? I'm struggling to make a living with huge student loans and low pay. I love teaching, but I don't know if I can afford to keep doing it.
It's a real challenge, and we definitely, so please encourage Rick to keep teaching. We need great teachers in the classroom. The income-based repayment, unfortunately, is not retroactive, so it doesn't help him, but going forward, starting in 2014, anyone who then comes into education. And there are many folks out there like Rick who either are struggling to make it or just couldn't become a teacher because they couldn't afford the staggering levels of debt. And going forward, that's going to be a huge barrier, a huge impediment that's removed.
Thank you. We'll take another question from a student here in the audience with us.
Thank you. My name is Fitz Lufkin. I'm a student at Georgetown University. And if I'm a student who currently has federal student loans, with the reforms that just got passed, how will the process be different for me next year?
The process should be very, very similar. And so there should be no disruption. Your loans should be all set. And what we're moving as a country is towards direct lending. What we did is we simply stopped subsidizing banks, cut out the middlemen, and by doing that, we're investing about $68 billion in education without going back to taxpayers for another dime. So there should be no disruption, no change that you should see. And hopefully going forward, you'll see folks with a lot more access to Pell Grants and have much more affordable loan repayments at the back end.
Erin, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I'm Erin Kilroy. I'm a senior at the Catholic University of America. And my question is, with the elimination of those middlemen, how is that going to affect interest rates, and when are we going to see those effects?
Yeah, interest rates are going to stay low just where they are. So we shouldn't see any increases, and the loans will stay stable. And what we're actually doing is the servicing of the loans, not the origination of the loans, but the servicing of the loans. That will all be done by the private sector, not by us, not by the Department of Education, not our sweet spot, not our core competency. And the private sector, the free market will play. Good actors will get more business, bad actors will lose business. Those places that can keep default rates down low, can build good relationships with students and universities, have a real business opportunity there, but your interest rates will not go up.
Thank you.
I have another question submitted online. It's one of my personal favorites. Larry from Southbridge, Massachusetts asks, Arnie, my granddaughter is 3. Will she be able to compete with other kids of her generation when she becomes a senior in college?
That's the question that drives all of us. And what I'm convinced of, what the president's convinced of, is that we have to educate our way to a better economy. It's the only way to get there. And I think our students are as smart, as capable, as committed as students anywhere in the world. But I think we have to level the playing field. And so we're pushing hard to get dramatic reforms and get better at every level of education. Early childhood education, which is hugely important, and you could make a pretty good case that's our best investment. K to 12, we're pushing fundamental change through Race to the Top, and we have to dramatically reduce our country's dropout rates and increase graduation rates. And we have to increase accessibility and affordability at the higher education side. But at the end of the day, we have to have many more students in our country graduating from college. The president's drawn a line in the sand. He said by 2020, we have to again lead the world in the percent of college graduates. And it's really interesting. About 2.5 decades ago, we did lead the world. We're flatlined. Many other countries have passed us by while we're stagnated, and we're paying the price for that today. And so every strategy, every reform effort we put in place, early childhood, K to 12, higher education, is to make sure those 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds today will have a chance to compete for jobs in an international global economy and be very successful.
Sort of a detail-oriented question. One of the things, it wasn't submitted online, but that I've heard from folks is how will student loan reform affect graduate students?
Yeah, we want to make sure that graduate students have a chance to pursue their dreams. And what's really interesting to me, again, about income-based repayment is maybe that is a law school student coming out of law school who wants to go work in a legal aid clinic in the inner city or in a rural community. Someone coming out of medical school and wants to go work in a medical clinic. This income-based repayment plan will work for them and will help them pursue their heart, pursue their passion, and not be burdened by that huge debt level.
Thank you. Another question submitted online. What is USDE's strategy for parent involvement, specifically helping communities build the capacity of both their educators and their families to effectively engage with one another in support of student learning? That one comes from Helen here in Washington, D.C.
It's a great question. And I always say parents are students' first teachers by definition, and they're always going to be students' most important teachers. And my wife and I have 2 young children at home, 6 and 8. And if we're not engaged with them, if we're not working in partnership with their teachers at school, if we're not making sure the TV's turned off at night and spending time reading with them and helping them with homework, we're not doing our job. And so it's so critically important that we engage parents in creative ways and make them part of the process and part of the team. I will tell you that often schools don't do enough to really encourage parental involvement. Sometimes parents are actually discouraged, sort of drop your child off at the door, walk away, and come pick them up at the end of the day. I'm a big fan of what I call schools as community centers, schools being open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after-school activities, whether that's academic enrichment for students or drama or arts or sports or music or chess or whatever it might be, but also GED classes and ESL classes and family literacy nights and potluck dinners. Food helps to bring people together. And when schools really make that outreach and engage parents, and sometimes principals have to go knock on doors and do things that maybe you think you shouldn't have to do, but you really have to meet parents halfway. But when you do that, parents want to step up and want to be engaged. And so we need to be creative. We need to do things to encourage that. One of the things that I did when I ran the Chicago Public Schools is I would ask students questions every year about what's working, what's not. And what was really interesting and actually pretty sad, frankly, was that many of our high schoolers, many of our teenagers, the thing they were asking for was to have more contact, more interaction with their parents. Mm-hmm. I think when people think about parental engagement, they often think about the 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, the babies. And yes, it's really important then, but I would argue in those teenage years, it's equally, if not more important. I think there's a myth out there that teenagers just want to be free and want to be away from adults. And our teenagers were actually desperately asking us to create vehicles, to create strategies to bring them and their parents together. So it's something that we have to really think about and challenge ourselves on and be much more creative.
Fantastic. I'll take another question submitted online. This one comes from Lily from Springfield, Pennsylvania. I'm going to be a City Year Corps member next year in Los Angeles. What role do you think nonprofits like City Year should have in addressing the dropout crisis and educational inequality in the United States?
Well, I'm a huge fan of City Year. I was actually one of the board members that helped to bring it from Boston to Chicago, and it's an amazing, amazing program. It's one of the most diverse, thoughtful, committed group of volunteers that I've ever seen. When those red jackets come into neighborhoods and students see people working together in ways that hasn't happened before, it is very, very powerful. And as we try and challenge the dropout rate, having volunteers, having nonprofits, having groups like City Year come in, whether it's tutoring programs at schools, whether it's mentoring programs with students, whether it's all the community service work. I think so often students drop out because they think they have nothing to offer. No one sort of touched them. If students start helping out in the community and start to see how powerful they are as a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old or 15-year-old, then I think they start to realize what school can do for them. So the more we're actively engaged with great nonprofits like City Year, the more they're in schools every single day, building relationships with students. Students drop out because they don't think anyone cares about them. They don't think anyone's reaching out. Where there's a mentor, where there's a role model, where there's someone to say, hang in there, we'll help you through the tough times. Here's what you can do with your education. That human touch, adult to student, nothing's more important than that. And as we seek to dramatically reduce the dropout rate and increase graduation rates, all of us have to come together. Parents, teachers, nonprofits, the business community, the philanthropic community, the religious community, all of us have to work together and get behind our students.
There's been a lot of talk, especially this year, about race to the top and no child left behind, and I think often people hear those phrases and sort of wonder what they're really about. Would you mind talking to us a little bit about those programs?
Sure, two different things, but be glad to elaborate where we're going. Race to the Top has been a fantastic opportunity for states to demonstrate what they're doing to really help their students achieve at much higher levels. And we gave out the most recent, two recent grants to the two states that did the best job of that, Delaware and Tennessee. We had $4 billion in the Race to the Top program. We're going to have a second round of funding that will go out to between 10 and 15 states that are really willing to challenge the status quo and push bold and dramatic reform that touches every single child. And we have about $3.4 billion left for the second round of Race to the Top. In states, for the second round, the applications will be due June 1st, and we'll be making grants in September. We've seen this amazing outpouring of innovation around the country, states adopting or moving towards higher standards, so we're not dumbing down standards and lying to students, states thinking how you get the best teachers and the best principals to historically underserved communities, states being very transparent around data systems and tracking student progress over time. And the level of ingenuity and creativity has been just phenomenal to watch. So it's been very, very encouraging. I think the best is yet to come. No Child Left Behind is the name of the law that is currently the law of the land. We're looking to reauthorize this year and make some pretty significant changes to it. What I will always give the previous administration credit for through No Child Left Behind was focusing on the achievement gap and disaggregating data. But there's a lot that frankly doesn't work about it. No Child Left Behind led to a dumbing down of standards, which is not good for children, it's not good for states, it's not good for the country. We need to raise the bar, college and career-ready standards for everyone. It led to a narrowing of the curriculum. Our students need a well-rounded education. It didn't focus enough on how you get the best teachers and principals to communities that are underserved, and there were very few rewards for success. It was 50 ways to fail, almost no ways to succeed. I think there are phenomenal teachers, phenomenal principals, great schools, great school districts around the country. We need to learn from them. We need to shine a spotlight on success. We need to recognize it. We need to reward it. We need to clone it where we can. And so I think we have a chance through reauthorization this year, working with Congress in a bipartisan way, to take what worked, keep it, but things that frankly didn't work or actually led to a dumbing down of standards, we have to change, and we're committed to doing that.
Great. I've got another question submitted online. This one's from Harold from Portland, Oregon. He says, what should be our response to people who claim that funding education, especially higher education, is just more big government? Isn't this one of those important initiatives that will help grow our economy and compete globally?
I can't say often enough that we have to educate our way to a better economy. That's the only way we're going to get there. And if you go back 25 or 30 years ago, you actually could drop out of high school and get a job and support a family, go work in a stockyard or a steel mill or something like that, and be successful. Today, those jobs are a distant memory from a bygone era. Students who drop out today from high school are basically condemned to poverty and social failure. There are no good jobs out there. So we have to work very, very hard. We have to invest in education. We have to invest in reform. If we don't do that, individual students don't have a chance to be successful. It hurts their families, it hurts their communities, it hurts their states, and ultimately hurts the country. And so this, I feel a real sense of economic imperative. I've said repeatedly, I think education is the civil rights issue of our generation. This is the dividing line between the haves and the have-nots today. And whether it's from the perspective of a sense of social justice, whether it's from the perspective of an economic imperative, we have to break through, we have to get dramatically better, and we have to do it with a real sense of urgency.
Thank you. We actually just had a question submitted online as we were chatting. Joe from Framingham, Massachusetts asks, does education reform apply to adults who want to continue their education, and if so, how?
It does. We have, we think about 90 million Americans adults, who are undereducated and need to go back to school. And so when we talk about, again, leading the world in the percentage of college graduates, people often think we're just talking about more 18-year-olds going to college. Yes, it's 18-year-olds, but it's also 28-year-olds and 48 and 58-year-olds coming back, whether it's to four-year institutions, whether it's to two-year community colleges and healthcare jobs, green energy jobs, tech jobs. We think community colleges can play a huge role here. That's why it's part of this bill. There's an additional $2 billion for community colleges. And so adults who don't have enough education to take that next step in their career ladder, we want to encourage them to come back, and we try and, again, lead the world in the percent of college graduates. It's not just going to be 18-year-olds helping us get there. It's going to be adults, mature Americans coming back to school, getting those degrees. They're going to lead us back to where we need to go.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got another question here from David from Katy, Texas. I hope I pronounced that right. He's asking specifically about special education. He says, special ed has historically fallen short of fulfilling the needs of its students. It's not a one-size-fits-all and really needs to be tailored to the individual student. What kinds of changes can be expected that will prepare these students to better contribute as members of society?
We need to do a number of things. I'll say a couple basics. One is, I think we've had far too low expectations often for students with special needs, and we really need to make sure that every child, regardless of their abilities or disabilities or whatever it might be, has a chance to fulfill their potential. Secondly, I think every teacher has to be a teacher of special education. There's been sort of this dividing line between traditional teachers or general education teachers and special education teachers, and often there's this dividing line and folks didn't talk, and too often those special education classes were in the basement or in the hallway or in the closet. And I think as we want to mainstream more and more students and integrate classrooms, we have to make sure that every teacher can work with students with special needs. And we want to invest very heavily in this area as part of the Recovery Act. There was north of $10 billion in additional money for special education, which is the right investment to make. But it's also how are we going to better train our teachers, every teacher, to work with students with special needs, and how are we going to raise the bar and really have much more lofty expectations for students who can be very, very successful. We have many special education students not just graduating from high school, going on to college, going on to do great things. That has to become much more the norm than the exception.
Thank you. Another question submitted previously online from Stephanie from East Sandwich, Massachusetts. My granddaughter is in the 5th grade and has seen school libraries closed due to budget cuts. Will libraries, music, and sports programs be important in any education reform program? Enlightenment and physical fitness are important to a well-rounded individual in society.
I couldn't agree more, and I always try and speak from personal experience. I was one of those young boys that if I wasn't running around every day, I couldn't have made it through the class, and I felt bad for my teachers if I didn't have that chance to go burn off a little steam. And I think that what was true for me is true for lots of students. So I'll talk about that one specifically, but first, more broadly, what I worry so much is I've traveled to 37 states and rural areas and suburban areas and urban areas. What I've heard constantly is a concern expressed by teachers, by parents, by students themselves about a narrowing of the curriculum. So as we move forward as part of our reauthorization, as part of our FY11 budget, we have a huge bucket that we're calling a well-rounded education. It's actually $1 billion. There's a $100 million increase. And yes, reading and math are hugely important, but so is science, so is social studies, so is PE, so are the arts, so is robotics, so is debate. And so we're trying to put unprecedented resources behind those states and those districts that want students to have a well-rounded education, and PE and physical fitness is a big piece of that. So often when we talk about this, again, people think we're talking about just at the high school level, and I think we have to start it much earlier than that. I think it's got to be, what are we doing for first graders and second graders and third graders so they can discover their interests, discover their passions, discover what they love to do. My children have been lucky enough to have a phenomenal music teacher, a great art instructor, and if you wait too long, I think students start to tune out sometimes. And when young students have those kinds of opportunities, it keeps them engaged in school, keeps them motivated, helps them develop their unique skills and interests. And so this idea of a well-rounded education, how we get back to that, is hugely important to us, and we want to try and push very hard to make sure students have those opportunities to learn the basics, but to learn so much more that we think is hugely important for them to be an active, engaged citizen long term.
I think one of the things that people find helpful is when they understand what's sort of behind someone's philosophy. And I was wondering if you might want to talk to us a little bit about your life experience and how that informs your approach.
I was really fortunate to grow up in a household where education was hugely important. Both my parents are educators. My dad taught at the University of Chicago, and my mother, before I was born in 1961, started an inner city tutoring program on the south side of Chicago, and she raised my brother and sister and me as a part of her program literally from the time we were born. So it was this hugely formative experience, and what I was lucky enough to see all my life is children who came from a very, very tough community, very high poverty rates, terrifying levels of violence at times, often not the most functional families, but they still went on to do extraordinary things because they had my mother and others in their life. And just from this small group of guys I grew up with, one's now a Hollywood movie star, Michael Clark Duncan. One went on to literally be a brain surgeon, Corky Lyons. The teenager who taught us, my mother had this philosophy that the 15-year-olds teach the 10-year-olds and 10-year-olds teach the 5-year-olds, but the teenager who taught me growing up, Carrie Holly, is now one of IBM's leaders worldwide. Another one of my peers, Ronald Ragland, helped me run and manage the Chicago Public Schools, and this is from one corner of 46 and Greenwood in a very, very tough community. And so what have been lucky enough to live and to experience, what I know in my heart, is that students, doesn't matter how poor, doesn't matter how tough things are, with real educational opportunity, with long-term support and guidance, every single child can be successful. And so we have to challenge ourselves to make sure that children who need those opportunities have them. Poverty is not destiny. Our students can do extraordinarily well. Take the toughest community, give that child a great early childhood education experience, put them in a great elementary school, have them go to great high school. They're going to go on to do wonderful things. I'm absolutely confident of that. But where students are going to drop out factories, where 50, 60, 70% of students are dropping out, despite our best intentions, despite our best efforts, we perpetuate poverty and we perpetuate social failure. And that's what we have to be willing to fight, and fight very vigorously every single day.
Thank you. Another question that came in from our students in the area. There has been talk at times of implementing a cap on interest for student loans, and is that something that's still being considered?
We need to look at those student interest rates. Luckily now they're significantly below market rates, which is good, and we want to keep them there as we go through these changes. I don't know if we have the ability to cap, we can look at that, but I think making sure they are affordable, and the big thing for me on the back end, making sure those loan repayments are much lower than they were historically, and then ultimately being erased if you go into public service. We think that's absolutely the right thing to do, so we think we're taking pretty significant steps, breakthrough steps in the right direction there.
Great. We've got another question just submitted online from Elizabeth from West Jordan, Utah. She says, healthy food creates productive minds. What is being done to improve the quality of food in schools?
Big deal. Great question. And people may not know that school lunches and school breakfasts actually aren't provided by the Department of Education. They're provided by the Department of Agriculture. And I've been working very closely with the Secretary there, Tom Vilsack, who's just doing a phenomenal job as we look to reauthorize the No Child Left Behind Act and come up with something much better. He's looking to reauthorize the Child Nutrition Act and wants to put an additional $1 billion out there to make sure school lunches and breakfasts are getting healthier, more nutritious food. He wants to get rid of the junk food out of the vending machines as well. And I couldn't agree more that our students have to be eating well, have to be dealing with building those good early habits around nutrition. The First Lady's Let's Move initiative, she's absolutely passionate on this and is providing great, great leadership. And it's interesting, there are two challenges we face as a country. One is childhood obesity, which is a big issue, and we have to break through with better food and better fitness, which we talked about earlier. The second one, and sometimes these are two sides of the same coin in the same communities, the other one is childhood hunger and students who don't have enough to eat. And sometimes, again, it's the same communities that are impacted on both sides of that. And so we need to be much more creative around making sure students who need access to healthy breakfasts and lunches have that access. We need to make sure that that food is good and nutritious. Students who, we did something with the Chicago Public Schools, with students we worried about not eating over the weekend, we'd actually send them home very quietly with a bag of food Friday afternoons to make sure they wouldn't come back to school Monday hungry, and we need to be very creative there. But I think we can, as we try and improve academically, improving the quality of the food in schools, the meals, improving of what's in the vending machine, making sure students have time to be physically fit and active before school, during the school day, lunchtime, after school. We can do so much better than what we're doing today, and we have an absolute opportunity to do that.
You spoke a little bit earlier about No Child Left Behind. I've got a question from Stacy in Rose Creek, Minnesota. She gets a little bit more into the weeds here. She says, No Child Left Behind's focus on accountability relied heavily on the scores of standardized tests, which we know are not accurate measurements of a student's knowledge or a school's success. So how will your reform measure a student's progress or success and the effectiveness of a school?
You need to look at multiple measures. Never one test score is never going to tell you everything you need to know by any stretch. At the end of the day, we want to look at graduation rates. Are we graduating more students and more of our high school graduates actually college and career ready, not having to take remedial classes in college and burn Pell Grants? The other big thing I want to look at on test scores is look at growth and gain. And let me explain what I mean. If you're a 6th grade teacher and I came to you as reading at the 3rd grade level, 3 grade levels behind, if I left your classroom a grade level behind, under No Child Left Behind, you were labeled a failure, your school was labeled a failure, and ultimately the district or the state could be labeled a failure. I think not only are you not a failure, you're not just a good teacher, you're a great teacher. And let me explain why. I gained 2 years of growth, 2 years of growth for 1 year of instruction. That is phenomenal teaching, and we need to be learning those examples, replicating it, figuring out what you did so well. We also need to figure out why I came to you 3 grade levels behind and try and correct that at the front end. But where we're looking at student improvement over time, everybody should be challenged. One of the biggest problems I have with No Child Left Behind is it focused on that small percent of students at or above grade level, at or above a cut score. And those students that are already way far ahead, there was no incentive to continue to move them. Those students that were behind, there was little incentive to move them. It's just focused on this little bubble right in the middle. If you're looking at growth and gain, then teachers and principals and schools and school districts are focused on every single child and seeing them all continue to improve. That's what we need to do, and that's what we're trying to do as we reauthorize.
Fantastic. Similarly, you spoke a little bit earlier about Race to the Top and the $4 billion or so in funds this year. The question comes from Scott from Lady Lake, Florida. What are plans to continue or expand this competition?
So we've put out the first round of grants, I said, that went to 2 states, a very high bar. We have $3.4 billion left, so a huge amount of money. And the second round of applications will be due in June from states. We anticipate a very, very vigorous competition and great ideas coming forward. It's going to make our jobs hard figuring out where it goes, but that's exactly what we want. And what the President's asked for in the proposed FY11 budget is an additional $1.35 billion to continue to do this. And what we want to do, Race to the Top has gotten so much of the publicity, but we have huge other pots of money to really drive fundamental and dramatic change. We have $3.5 billion in school improvement grants to turn around the nation's lowest performing schools. So we have a massive investment there where it's not quite working. We have, the applications are out now, the $650 million Invest in Innovation Fund, which is a really big deal to have districts and nonprofits and states step forward and say, this is what we're doing to raise the bar for all students and close the achievement gap. We have money to reward great teachers and great principals. We have the Promised Neighborhoods Initiative, $210 million to build upon Jeffrey Canada's great work in Harlem, in New York, and really build entire communities around schools where students have a chance to fulfill their academic and social potential. So there's never been so many opportunities for states and districts, nonprofits, individual schools to put their best foot forward, say this is what we're doing, and what we want to do is simply take to scale what works. I always joke that the best ideas are never going to come from Washington, they're never going to come from me or from anyone else here. The best ideas in education are always going to come from great teachers and great principals at the local level. And what we want to do is take those islands of excellence, those pockets of excellence, take them to scale, have them impact more students, and we have this phenomenal opportunity to do that.
Fantastic. You've spoken some about this and especially about the challenges of educational disparity. Question from Enku in Boston, Massachusetts that just came in. How do we close that education disparity within the United States?
A couple of ways. We have to, our achievement gap is unacceptably large and unacceptably, it's been the progress of closing it, of shrinking that gap has been unacceptably slow. I'm convinced if we're serious about closing the achievement gap, we have to close what I call the opportunity gap. So how do we identify and recruit the hardest working, the most committed teachers and principals to go to historically underserved communities, be that inner city, urban, or rural? Historically, there have been very few incentives to do that and lots of disincentives for the best talent to go where we need the most. And we want to try and absolutely turn that on its head. When I talk about schools being community schools, our schools need to be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. I usually get booed by children when I say this, but I think our school day is too short, our school week is too short, our school year is too short. Our school calendar today is based upon the agrarian economy. There are not too many children in America today working in the fields in the summer. And when we talk about leveling the playing field and having our students compete with children in India and China, they're just going to school 20, 30, 40 more days than us each year. They're not smarter than our students, they're just working harder. And so we need to think very differently, particularly in disadvantaged communities, about how we use time. The final thing I'll say on that is that we don't need another study about what happens during the summer. We have devastating research that talks about summer reading loss, that students get to a certain point in June and they come back to school in September and they're further behind than when they left. And so those students who aren't being read to, who aren't going to summer camps in summer, who aren't going to museums and parks and libraries, we need to work with those students more time, longer days, longer weeks, longer years. And I'm convinced if we do that, students are going to do extraordinarily well. And we have lots of examples of that. But we have to be willing to do things differently if we expect different results.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Demetria, Fitz, and Aaron. And thank all of you for joining us. That'll do it for our special webcast.